Alright, let's pick up where we started off last day. Remember when we were talking about the structure of the small intestine, we were talking about 3 layers of folds. First ones were the plicae. These are the biggest ones. Those ones we could easily see. And then on the plicae we get the small, tiny foldings, which we call the villi. And this is showing you one single villi right here. And then we get an even smaller fold that we call the microvilli. So the microvilli are actually going to be right on the edge of the cell. So microvilli are tiny. There's no way we can see them with our actual microscopes. Whoops, skipped ahead. Here we go. So like I said, our microvilli are way too small for us to see on our microscopes. And if you look at the picture next to us right here, you'll see that the magnification on this is 46,800. So that's 45,800 times more than we can do in our scopes. So these are very, very small. And we actually call the microvilli, the groups of microvilli, the brush border. Okay. Now it's this brush border that's really, really important when it comes to chemical digestion and absorption of the food that we eat. And that's because these brush border structures, these microvilli, they're going to create or produce several enzymes that are going to help us chemically digest our food as well as absorb it. So if we look at the picture on this slide, we can see that we've got 3 villi, 1, 2, 3, and then the microvilli, of course, are going to be right on the outside out here, and they're going to be too small for us to see. All right. This is going to be the lumen, so the outside, the inside part of, in this case, the duodenum, but any part of the small intestine. So our food will come directly into contact with our brush border, with the villi in the small intestine. And as that happens, we're going to have those brush border enzymes that are located there. Those enzymes are going to be able to further chemically digest the food. There's the chyme at that point. And then not only that, but these cells are also modified to absorb the food inside of our tissue, and that's when it can be transported around the rest of the body. So the brush border is a very, very important part of our intestine because it helps with chemical digestion, and it also is specialized for absorption. Now, here's a look at some of the enzymes that are created at the brush border. One of the enzymes produced is called enterokinase. And remember, enzymes are always going to end with ASE, right? If you see ASE at the end of a word, that's going to be a hint to you that we're going to be looking at an enzyme. So we've got enterokinase first. And that's an enzyme that's going to activate a molecule called trypsinogen. Now, think back about when you last seen a word ending with synogen. All right, so this is another proenzyme. It's secreted by the pancreas, so it's going to come into play in digestion a little bit further down in the small intestine, but it's an important enzyme which goes on to activate another important enzyme. All right, we also have these 3 enzymes that are going to digest our monosaccharides or small saccharides, small sugars. And like I said before, the ASE is for enzyme, and you can guess which ones these are going to work on, right? So maltase is going to work on maltose, sucrase is going to work on sucrose, and lactase is going to work on lactose. Those are all simple sugars that we digest regularly from our food. Finally, we're going to come down to these enzymes we call peptidases, and you've seen the word peptid before because a peptid can be a small string of amino acids or proteins. So these peptidases are going to be enzymes that further break down protein peptides or chains of amino acids. Now, let's have a look at some of the differences of the small intestine and its structure. Okay, so we're stepping back a little bit from the physiology, the enzymes. We're going to look a little bit more at the anatomy for a couple of slides. The submucosa of the duodenum or the duodenum, it contains these glands on the outside that we call Brunner's glands. Okay, and what Brunner's glands do is they help secrete a mucus that travels to the inside part of the lumen and kind of covers around the villi that are there. Now, what this mucus is going to do, it's going to act as a protective layer to protect the epithelium of the duodenum from the acidity of the chyme. So the duodenum is going to be the first place that the food encounters in the small intestine as it comes from the stomach. So remember when we talked about the chyme that's in the stomach, we're looking at a very low pH of 1 to 2, which is really, really acidic. And this level of acidity can cause a lot of damage to normal tissues. So what this Brunner's glands does is it adds the mucus, which is going to protect the stomach, or the villi of the intestine from coming into contact with this really low acidity chyme. It's also going to have some buffers that's going to help bring the acidity, the pH of this chyme, from 1.2 up to 7.8, which is less toxic to tissues, and it's also the pH that the enzymes in the small intestine will work at. The small intestine is also going to have a layer of muscularis, not 3 layers like we've seen in the stomach, but it's going to have 2 layers of muscle. And this muscularis is going to allow the small intestine to stretch. It's also going to allow it to have those peristaltic waves. So peristalsis is also going to occur here and push the food along through the small intestine in the digestive tract. All right, so here's how we break down the small intestine. All right. The first part of the small intestine, like we were just talking about, is the duodenum. And the duodenum is going to empty, so our stomach would empty and come in right here. And this first part of the small intestine is colored in blue here. That's the duodenum, and it's going to be about 20 centimeters long. Okay, so it's the shortest part of the small intestine, and its function is to accept food from the stomach and deal with the acidity that it's going to encounter there. From the duodenum, we move into the jejunum, and the jejunum is shown in pink on this slide. So this part here is the jejunum. Lines are getting a bit messy. And this is the middle portion of the small intestine. It's going to be about 2.5 meters long, so quite long. You can see it's all folded up there. And we've got those folds on the inside as well, which increases, again, the surface area. And the main function of this is going to be absorption. And then finally, we get the third part of the small intestine, and we're going to that's called the ileum. And the ileum is the longest part. It's 4 meters long. Again, it's all coiled up, and we can see it down here. Let me go with a slightly different color. So ileum is down here. Okay, and what the ileum is going to do, it's also going to be a place where we get a lot of absorption, but it's also going to connect to the large intestine, and that's going to have some separate issues that we'll talk about in the next little while. Okay, so let's go through these ones individually. The lining of the small intestine is going to be different structurally as we move from the duodenum to the jejunum to the ileum. Okay. Basically because their functions change as we move further along the digestive tract. In the duodenum, which is the first part of the small intestine, the main function is going to be to neutralize that chyme. Okay, that really acidic chyme that comes from the stomach, that's going to damage the rest of the tissues in the digestive system unless it's fixed. So what I mean by fixed is neutralize, and that's exactly what's going to happen here through those Brunner's glands that we were talking about a couple of seconds ago. Now the structure in the duodenum is a bit different. We're going to see very few plicae, so those big folds, and the folds that we will see, the villi on them are going to be quite small. Again, this section is not specialized for absorption. What this section is for is to neutralize that chyme so that it can pass safely through the rest of the intestine. The next section we'll move to is the jejunum, and this is going to function. The main absorption is going to the main function is going to be absorption. In this part, we're going to see we're going to see these large plicae. So these are these sections right here, and then on the plicae we're going to see all of those villi, and those are an example of a villi, or those finger-like projections right here. There's going to be lots of plique. There's going to be lots of villi, and the whole point is to have as much surface area as possible, so that we can digest as much of our food as we can, possibly be the most efficient we can, as well as absorb as many nutrients as we can from our food. Now, as we move through the jejunum, those villi are going to be quite large, but they will get smaller and smaller as we get near the ileum, which is the last part of the small intestine. Now, when we get to the small intestine, to the end, we get to the ileum. The main function of the ileum is going to be for protection. And I'm sure you guys are probably saying, well, what do we need protection from? And what we actually need for protection from is the bacteria that live and flourish in our large intestine. So as we move down into the ileum, what we're seeing are these villi are going to get smaller and not as numerous. And then we're also going to see we get these large structures here, these nodules, and these are lymphatic vessels, lymphatic nodules. And lymphatic tissue is tissue that has direct access to many immune functions, and this will act as a layer of protection in case any bacteria escape from the large intestine. We have our immune system right there to protect us so that we don't get any infections deep in our digestive tract. Okay, so let's talk about our first accessory gland, which is the pancreas. Now, you guys have probably remember the pancreas when we talked about the endocrine system, but the pancreas has two functions. It's got an endocrine function, or endocrine cells, and it's got an exocrine, or exocrine cells. You did this in lab, I think, or we will look at this in lab next week, I think. The endocrine cells of the pancreas are going to be the islets of Langerhans. Okay, and these are going to secrete the hormones insulin and glucagon, and these get secreted into the bloodstream. And you've talked about this in the previous unit. And insulin and glucagon have a major function of controlling blood glucose levels. In terms of the digestive system, what we're concerned about are the exocrine cells. Now, the exocrine cells are not the Langerhans, the islets of Langerhans, but those are the pancreatic cells that are found in the different acini that we'll see throughout the structure. These cells are going to produce pancreatic juice, and they're going to be carried from the pancreas through a duct and empty into the small intestine. Now, what pancreatic juice is, it's an alkaline mixture, so it's slightly basic, mixture of digestive enzymes, water, and ions. And the pancreas can secrete a full liter of pancreatic juice into the small intestine every day. Now, most of the function of the pancreas is actually exocrine. Okay, it doesn't spend all of its time or most of its time worrying about blood glucose, but it does have that important role to play. So it spends most of its time producing digestive enzymes and buffers that are delivered to the duodenum, so the first part of the small intestine, through the pancreatic duct. So if we look at our picture down here, this is our pancreas. It's going to be tucked in, so our stomach would kind of sit on top of here like this, and our stomach would empty into the duodenum right here, and then we get the pancreatic duct that travels through the pancreas, and it empties itself into the duodenum, and that's going to carry all of those digestive enzymes and buffers in here to the small intestine, the lumen of the duodenum, and that's where it's going to help neutralize that chyme, bring the pH up a little bit, and start the chemical digestion in the small intestine. So there are several enzymes that are going to be attributed to the pancreas, and they play a pivotal role in chemical digestion, and we will talk about all of those in the next video.